Hi, everyone, and welcome to Politics and Prose Live. We're here today with Laura Zam to discuss her book, The Pleasure Plan. And before we get started, I just want to point everyone to the green button right below me. You can purchase your copy of The Pleasure Plan there from Politics and Prose. It'd be a great way to support Laura and to support local independent bookstore. Secondly, I'd like to point out the Ask a Question feature at the bottom. We already have a question there, which is great. So if you have any questions, the second half of the program is going to be dedicated to Q&A. So please put your questions there. I see a lot of people in the chat, which is awesome. But if you could try to just concentrate the questions in the Ask a Question area, that would be much appreciated. And lastly, some of you already donated to get into the event, but if you'd like to donate a little more to Politics and Prose, there is also a donate button at the bottom of your screen. And now to start. Tonight, I'm honored to introduce Laura Zam to discuss her book, The Pleasure Plan. Among her many bona fides, Laura is a sexuality educator, certified trauma professional, wellness trainer, and award-winning solo performer, whose work focuses on sexual healing. Based on popular essays in the New York Times Modern Love and Salon, as well as an off-Broadway one-person play, The Pleasure Plan demystifies taboos, encourages women to make pleasure a priority, and shows men how they can support their female partners. Tonight, Laura will be in conversation with Abby Maslin, the author of the 2019 memoir, Love You Hard. Now, without any further ado, here is Laura Zam and Abby Maslin.
Awesome.
Hey!
Laura, I don't know how we're going to do this in 1 hour.
So excited.
I think we have so much to talk about. I love The Pleasure Plan so much. It surprised me. It surprised me in how relatable it is for every woman and beyond women, for everybody in their sexuality. And I would just love it if you could start us off by reading a little bit from the book.
Yay. Okay. All right. This is from the very beginning. It's the prologue. And I think it will explain a lot about what the book is. Maybe you're just not a very sexual person, says Dr. Faye in a slow Southern drawl. I have come to this office to save my new marriage. After 30 years of searching, is it echoey or is it just me?
Sounds maybe a little bit echoey. I'm not sure how it sounds to others, but feel free to put something in the chat.
Okay, yeah, put something in the chat if this sound is weird. Maybe Tom can troubleshoot a little. Is the sound okay?
It's a little echoey, but I think it's okay. Yeah, I don't know if you maybe want to refresh your browser or something.
Okay, I'm going to do that. All right.
This is book launching in 2020.
Did you go on screen there?
All right, I think you're back.
Okay. That's echoey, but better.
It's a little better.
A little better. Okay. I'm going to start again. All right. Maybe you're just not a very sexual person, says Dr. Faye in a slow Southern drawl. I have come to this office to save my new marriage. After 30 years of searching, I found a man I love who loves me back. At 48, I never had reciprocity before, but now I do with Kurt, my miracle husband. Kurt doesn't know the extent of my damage. What if I'm just broken? I ask, my voice a shaky vibrato. I've never talked openly about the problems plaguing me since I was 17. Low libido, challenges with orgasm, and pelvic pain. I always assumed my obstacles were permanent. I've recently started doubting if that's true. If my sexuality is broken, I venture, sitting taller on the maroon leather couch I'm sticking to. I can fix it, can't I? Not if you have no libido, says Dr. Fay, an attractive marriage and family therapist specializing in hypnosis. Look, it's fine to have no libido. You know that, right? I nod, thinking of grandmas and nuns and those that make asexual legitimate lifestyle. But Faye's outfit, strange for a mental health professional, especially one who's middle-aged, puts notions in my head. A question pulls like thread from her gold metallic miniskirt. It sheds from her short-sleeved mohair sweater. She looks like an unwashed lover might come by right after I leave here. So I ask, can eros be taught? The hypnotist chuckles, tucking brown hair behind her ears and widening her pale green eyes. Would you like to hear about others in your situation, she inquires. Now, one client, she'd rather be waterboarded than sleep with her husband. I know I should interrupt, revealing what I haven't shared yet, the experiment. 2 weeks ago, I implemented a strategy to finally heal after 30 years. It started with no longer believing that pleasure is out of reach. As Dr. Fay keeps going on, I think I've got to get this back on track. I say to her, do you think we can talk about my trauma? I watch her hands find their way to her hips. Her pose makes me think she's forgotten what I disclosed in my previous telephone intake. That happened a long time ago, she says finally with a wave of pink manicure. What if she's right about my past? These events did happen a long time ago. As for my therapists of yore, childhood was all they dwelled upon, never what I should do with grown-up maladies I was left with. Even my gynecologist was stumped. Since I started my experiment, I've learned official names in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, DSM. Hyposexual desire disorder, female sexual arousal disorder, female orgasmic disorder, sexual aversion disorder, dyspareunia, vaginismus. I have every hoo-ha hang-up in the DSM. Crucially, the DSM said that hypnosis could help with many of my problems. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. I go back and forth with Dr. Fay, who doesn't want to hypnotize me because she thinks I have no libido, and that's that. Giving up, I say, so what should I do with my husband? Just have sex, Fay answers with a shrug. What do you mean? Just have sex. When? Whenever. Say your husband wants to get physical twice a week and you don't want to. You could just have sex. You don't have to like working out to go to the gym, do you? I guess not. My curative project has just been killed. The way I conceived of it, hypnosis, or at least faith, would plow a path for adventurous, multidimensional repair. I named this endeavor the pleasure plan. Taking a last glance around the office and at the hypnotist who has walked me into the empty waiting room, I say to myself, she's got to be the worst therapist on the entire planet. Consequently, I opened the door to the hallway, It looks like a long tan tunnel, a portal taking me back to my delicate life. I swing around. I want to try hypnosis, I announce. I know you don't think it will help, but I want to do it anyway. I have to start somewhere. If I leave here without some implementation of my plan, I don't trust myself to seek out another hypnotist or to advance. Perhaps my experiment has already stirred up desire. And what I desire now is auto-suggestion on a red leather couch with a therapist who may or may not be incompetent. I'd like to schedule another appointment, I say, taking out my planner. Reluctantly, she agrees. Driving home to my husband, I try to imagine what lies beyond this day. I can't see it, not yet. What it will take to ultimately fully heal. 15 kinds of practitioners, 30 pleasure-enhancing modalities. I never could have predicted the struggles Kurt and I would encounter or the aliveness that would permeate our lives. I have no idea what's in store for me. All I know is that whatever happens, this visit has already altered my future. It has strengthened my body, my being, for hope.
Thank you for sharing. I feel like we get such glimpses of your bravery just in that prologue. Before this conversation went live, I was telling you, I think you're such a remarkable advocate for yourself. And the journey that you take readers on following that prologue, which we'll dive into in just a moment, is such a wonderful example of women having to listen to their inner wisdom, even when it is in conflict with what experts are telling you and the information that you're reading, widely. And I'm wondering, why do you think women have such a hard time recognizing, addressing, and talking about their sexual issues?
I think they have a difficult time because we're not taught that we have access to pleasure, that we can demand pleasure, that we can ask pleasure. And our early education, sex education, is really, really partial and crummy. And so I think because we don't understand necessarily how we work pleasure-wise, and the world tells us that it's male pleasure that's really paramount, I think that we maybe blame ourselves if we are not knocking over the furniture ourselves, or we just minimize it and say, well, it's not really that important because this guy has got to have an erection and he's got to have an orgasm. That's really, really important. The world is going to fall apart if a guy, let's say, gets aroused and does not have an orgasm. So I think it's very ingrained how little we value this for ourselves.
And yet, it didn't appear that you were privy to any better sexual education than most of us. And yet you found this voice of permission within yourself to not only face the fact that it was an issue and that you identified this as a problem in your life, but then to go chase a solution, chase multiple solutions, chase a path of healing. Where did that permission come from?
I think the permission came from a weird place. I think it came from my anger in a way. It was a part of my response to my trauma. So I didn't, okay. My husband just told me to talk faster because there's an echo and it's sounding weird. Okay.
I think for some of us with hearing issues, it's, it's nice to have the slowdown, but
Am I really echoey?
it's really not, it's not that bad. No.
Okay. Because you don't sound echoey, I sound echoey. Okay, he wants me to talk fast. I'm going to talk really fast.
What Kurt wants, Kurt gets. Okay.
All right. So, yes. So the way my trauma hit me was that I didn't feel so much anger towards the men who had abused me. Not probably when I first started therapy in my 20s, but that dissipated. Where I found the anger was when I did this project. I kind of found this anger that like an untapped well of anger. And the anger was that something had been taken from me, the ability to have a healthy sexuality. And by golly, I was going to get it back. I didn't want these people who had abused me to win. I wanted to have what was mine, what I felt was my birthright.
Yeah, and I felt angry on your behalf as a reader, because the advice you were receiving, it seems wild to me that in 2020, any therapist would tell you that sexual trauma as a child is not related to sexual issues as an adult. That seems just absolutely ludicrous, right? And yet you have this inner wisdom about yourself that's saying there is a psychological component to my sexuality that I need to dig into. And the expert that you have brought yourself to bravely, because even getting yourself in front of an expert for a lot of people it takes so much courage. That's a scary step to take. And then you're having to listen to advice that just doesn't sit right in your soul, and make a choice to continue on this path of healing and to pursue other healers. So will you talk to us about some of the other healers that you brought yourself to on this journey, and maybe some of the more transformative moments that you experienced?
Yes. All right. So I do start the journey pretty much seeing this hypnotist who is, I think, incompetent. Although I have to say that everybody that I saw, of the 15 different practitioners and all the 30 different healing modalities, everybody that I saw and everything that was offered me a puzzle piece that I could use to put together this ultimate puzzle of all of my different problems. But transformative moments or transformative experiences, well, I'd have to say that there were two categories. The first was finding a proper diagnosis. And there were a few doctors that I saw that were able to really give me a medical explanation for what was going on, and to also offer me remedy for that. So that was a whole category that was transformative. The other was becoming not just privy, but also working with these women who were dispensing sex information and sex education. And some of them were a bit out there. So I saw Betty Dodson, who was recently featured on Goop Lab, Gwyneth Paltrow's new show on Netflix. And Betty, since the 1970s, has been holding these weekend-long naked workshops where women show their vulvas to other women and also masturbate with each other. But the masturbation is to practice an arousal and pleasure technique that she teaches you. So that was pretty out there, but absolutely transformative, because Betty has such good information about female pleasure that's still not commonly known. So that was one person. I also had a private session with a tantrika who showed me on my own body where this part of the clitoris was, and another part of the clitoris that's not commonly known, where the G-spot is. But the G-spot, of course, is internal. So she had to, reach right in. So that was pretty scary, but also very, very illuminating. And I realized, where else was I going to get this information? I didn't have that information myself. I didn't have it from partners that I had had, because where would they get it? I'm supposed to have this information, but if I don't have access to understanding my own body, where is it going to come from?
You know, you were living this journey very privately in one way, and then very publicly in another way, as you made it into theater, you made it into art, and then of course made it into a book. So what was the experience of living this very profound, intimate kind of transformative experience, and then knowing at the same time that you're going to shape it into something that you share with the world? Can you talk about that process?
Yes. So I should mention that the impetus to really start the major portion of my healing was a commission to write a one-person play. And the reason that I used that was because I felt utterly stuck and so ashamed of these problems. And I felt so broken that I didn't have the wherewithal to heal myself or to move forward. And I didn't know how to make pleasure a priority. It seemed so completely irrelevant. But then I was given the play commission, and I thought, what if I, as an experiment, if I talked about my most shameful secret, and also if I use the play commission as a way to heal? Because what I would do is I would make a list of practitioners, and I would just go down the list and I would write about them. And also in my encounters, I would look for the absurdity. And so I might even choose people with whom I would have encounters that might be otherwise scary. But I knew that would make a good chapter in my book. And so as an example, I went to visit the site where I was sexually abused when I was 4 years old. Now, I did this because I thought it would make a good scene in my play. And it absolutely changed my life. It absolutely, radically changed the way that I remember what happened to me. Because now I can't remember the abuse without remembering going back and taking this risk. And so what I primarily remember is my own agency and courage. And then the second part is what happened to me when I was 4. But I only did that because of the play.
In a way, the art was the permission, right?
Yes.
To do something that I could imagine a lot of women saying, this is too selfish a pursuit. This is too, I don't know, well, certainly scary a pursuit, right? So it's so interesting to me that, the entryway for you was through something familiar, which was creating theater, which was, putting experiences into words, and then allowing that to be the vessel to kind of carry you forward in this experience. But this experience, was not only intimate for you, it's an incredibly intimate experience for Kurt, your husband, as well. And I know, as a memoirist who, has recently written a book about my own marriage, this is tricky territory. It can be very scary to write about the people that you love, because you have a job of protecting them at the same time that you have a job of telling the truth. So can you talk about that? What was it like, for you and Kurt to go through this together?
Yeah, it was hard. So Kurt was not really very enthusiastic about my creating a one-person play about our sex life. And I performed my one-person play. So that was part of the deal, that I was not only going to write this, but I was going to put it on the stage in front of hundreds of people. Yeah, he didn't like that.
Kurt didn't know what he was signing up for. He knows now, though.
So that was a whole journey to convince him that this would be a good idea. He was very skeptical, but he was willing to go along with it and see how it played out. So that was a whole process for us and in our marriage. And the play in its form, well, there were some roller coasters with regard to the play, I'll say that.
And then what about the experience of putting it into the form of a book?
Yeah, so it was once I got the book deal, we were already at a point where Kurt felt comfortable with my talking about this content publicly. Because what happened eventually was that Kurt felt that this was really working for me. This was really healing me, and it was also healing us. It was giving me a libido, which he was interested in. But also, at some point, Kurt felt like, well, what about me? What about my sexual healing? And that was so interesting to me because it made me see that sexual healing is not just for somebody who was molested as a child. Sexual healing's for everybody because we all have wounds, whether that be rejection or body shame or body image issues or just some kind of conditioning, right? Or something that we feel is maybe never been quite expressed, or problems that of course start to emerge, especially as we get older. But I want to go back a second to an earlier point about the play, because I really don't think that it was theater itself that did this for me, or even necessarily art. It was taking on a project. It was turning what had felt like a stuck, amorphous experience that I couldn't even bend my mind around and organize in terms of progress. It was just giving myself some kind of a process that I could turn to and that would give me a template. I turned to playmaking because I knew how to make a play. I knew how to write a one-person play. But for other people, they may turn to another kind of project. It could just be maybe having a journal that's dedicated to this healing, or it could be turning their progress into a scrapbook, or it could be a documentary. I think it can be anything that allows people to encapsulate this in some way and conceptualize it with some internal organization that's almost imposed upon it to combat the stuckness.
That makes so much sense, because I think that, sexual issues, but any issues that require a really deep self-reflection and holding a mirror up to something that's deeply uncomfortable, the lack of organization in approaching something like that is what deters people from beginning that process. So that makes so much sense. I want to encourage anybody who has a question to start entering them in, because we will get to questions in just a moment.
Yeah.
I have only 60 jillion more, so we'll get to the end there. I'd love to talk to you about your mom. She enters into this story in many different phases and many different parts, and your recapturing of your memories from your life with her are so fascinating to me. Your mother was a Holocaust survivor who endured just unimaginable traumas of her own. And as a reader, I was sitting here just asking myself, what part of our sexual makeup is carried in our DNA? Do we inherit other traumas, the traumas of our family and our ancestors? How does this work in regards to sex and sexuality? Would you talk about her?
Yeah, sure. My mother was a fascinating person, and maybe some people will be on here who knew my mom. So my mother is somebody who appears in the book a lot, because what I'm really working against in terms of wanting to overcome my trauma is I'm working with my mother's trauma and her relationship with her trauma. And my mother's relationship with her trauma was a kind of despondency in a way. My mother thought that, well, that's what men are like. Men are going to be predators. My mother was I don't know if she was assaulted, but she experienced different kinds of sexual violation or some kind of harm during the Holocaust from Jews and Nazis. From Jews and Nazis.
Wow.
So there was a kind of threat that was layered on top of all of this horrendous persecution. So my mother didn't have the best concept, let's say, of men as not being pigs in a way, even though she stayed married to my husband, and I mean my father, and loved him dearly. So I think that I absorbed a lot of my mother's conditioning or her beliefs about the world and about gender and about what women are entitled to. So I think that my mother didn't necessarily uphold her own pleasure in any aspect of her life. But at the same time, she was also very fun-loving, and she recognized that after her harm, the antidote to that was to live well and to live fully. And so I really absorbed that and I tucked that away. And I did live that out in different aspects of my life. But I felt very stuck, as I said, when it came to sexuality. But I understood the message that life is precious and that in order to stave off death and horror, that pleasure is really the best antidote and in many ways the best weapon.
Yeah, I mean, one question that I had for you was, where did this belief come from that there could be more to sex and desire than you had previously experienced? And I think that's my answer. In a way, it sounds like you knew from her belief and her true attachment to this idea that everything is precious. And so we do have a responsibility to maximize this time that we have and our experiences here on Earth. Could you, if there's anything else you want to add to that?
Yeah,
I'm putting that together for myself.
I think that you touched upon it earlier, Abby, when you were saying that why is this important? And I think that that's something that's really important right now with the pandemic, right? Why is this book important now? Why is pleasure even important when we've got so much going on? And I think that pleasure is important because I touched upon it a second ago. Pleasure is the opposite of harm. It's the opposite. And because it's the opposite, it's the antidote. You can't have pleasure and harm simultaneously, right? It's impossible. And so if you're not being harmed, then I think it's a way for us to heal. It's a way for us to heal from those wounds because we all have been mistreated, right? We've all been rejected. We've all had childhood wounds. We've all had all kinds of ways that we might have been even traumatized. And I think pleasure is a way for us to come back into our bodies. It's a way to ground ourselves, but it's also a way to find wholeness and a way to soothe that and to kind of smooth out rough edges that are part of perhaps this initial harm, this initial wound.
And it's living as a human being is just to live a constant paradox of everything, right? And so there is no escaping this life without the pain and without the harm. And we are certainly entitled to the pleasure as well. This book is just such a powerful reminder that this quest belongs to everyone, every human.
That's right.
And we have some beautiful questions that have just come in. I want to make sure to get to those. I promised myself that I would ask you this question about caregiving, though. When I wrote Love You Hard, and I had made a commitment to myself to telling a very honest story about caregiving for my husband who had become suddenly disabled from a traumatic brain injury, I chose to write about some of our first sexual experiences post-injury. And it was like I set the world on fire in some people's lives. I couldn't believe that I chose to make that decision to talk about just how honest and kind of awkward and not pleasurable that experience was. And I did so because nobody's talking about caregiver sexuality and nobody's talking about caregiver sex. And I know you don't specifically get into it in this book, but there is a period of time for which you were Kurt's primary caregiver. And I'm wondering if you would speak to that idea of, desire and sexuality as it butts up against this idea of caregiving as well.
Yeah. And I really responded to that so much in your book, Abby. I thought it was really like the most honest book about love that I've ever read.
Thank you.
Because you went into those areas and really looked at what was happening. And if you haven't read Abby's book, and I hope you do, her husband goes to, it's a Nats game, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he goes to a Nats game and he never comes home. And then she found out that he was attacked, brutally attacked. And then it's years of his rehabilitation. He couldn't talk. He couldn't even feed himself, right?
Correct, yeah.
So it's an amazing, amazing book. And so I related to that so much because I read it actually. I won't say too much, many people know, but Kurt did get sick. And it is partially in my book. And so in terms of caregiver sex, yeah, it's really, it's amazing because I came to realize something in the book that is, it's like this. We bring everything to our bedroom and our marriage, the good and the bad. And the image that I use, or the metaphor that I use, is that of the trousseau. Because the trousseau is something historically a woman was given as a way that she could, or a place where she could pull out linens and garments and negligees and different kinds of things that would symbolize the hope of her marriage. And she could go back to that chest, let's say, and she could find that hope. And so I really got very, very interested in this idea of what's in that chest, and that it's not just about these beautiful, crisp linens, but it's everything. And sometimes it's a brutal attack, or it's illness, or it's dysfunction, or it's aging. And all of these things are in the mix. And it's not like in the movies. But even without those things, it's never going to be like in the movies, because that's part of the problem, is that we think that everyone else is having sex like in the movies, and we judge ourselves for not having that sex. And we are all just having, normal sex, bad sex, sex with sexual pain, or trying not to have pain, or figuring it out, and trying to have a conversation, or having a partner who is, who's rehabilitating. So I think that it's a beautiful place. This caregiver sex is a beautiful place to express love. And I think it's a beautiful place to accept the reality of what intimacy is, what intimacy really is, including physical intimacy, and that it's not all daisies and roses. It's everything.
You've normalized everybody's entire sexual histories just in that monologue, Laura. People are saying preach in the chat. Yes, absolutely. Damn expectations. They're screwing us all over. They're just creating such horrible shame that we have to unlearn.
Right.
That's why this book was such a liberation for me. I think it just invites us all to be who we are. So with that, let me go to some of these questions. Oh gosh, there's some fantastic ones here. What modality of therapy did you find the most helpful or gave you the biggest breakthrough?
Yeah, I touched upon it just before. It was actually not a modality so per se, but it was actually two categories. One category is physicians who know about sex, who are knowledgeable about my particular issue. And the other category was women who knew about pleasure, who could pass on that information for me and to me. And not everybody has to take a naked workshop with Betty Dodson, who's 91 now. She was 86 when I saw her. I just want to mention that. So not everyone has to do that. Betty has a book. I'm going to show you her book in a moment. There's lots of books. There's lots and lots of resources online, lots of places to learn about sexuality, female sexual response, and pleasure. So, but it was those two categories together that really, really put the final puzzle pieces together.
What are you hoping that readers take away from your book? I'm sure there's many, many insights, but is there one overarching message?
Yes, pleasure is important. I want to inspire my readers to make pleasure a priority, and to make it a priority because it's important that we have an antidote to harm. It's important that we have a good experience in our bodies on this earth. That matters, just as it matters whether somebody is abused or tortured or starved, or all of these things that we think about and have compassion for. Just as that is important, the opposite is also important. That we also are well fed, that we also have tenderness and lovely touch, as opposed to the torture, right? If we're going to talk about what we're concerned about in terms of harm, let's talk about going all the way to the other end of the spectrum to talk about why it's important that we really, really don't have the harm.
Oh, there's several questions that just kind of lead directly from where we just left off, and one is, how do we stop genital shame? At what age should we be targeting, and who is responsible to help this fight? Doctors, mothers, sex ed teachers, dads, media. This is from somebody who really appreciates your work as an advocate.
Yeah, so I mentioned that there were two categories for healing. One was seeing the doctors, and one was seeing these women or getting their information. So one of those doctors is actually on here. Her name is Rachel Rubin, MD. And Dr. Rubin is a urologic surgeon and a sexual medicine doctor. And people don't necessarily know that there are these physicians who are specialists in sexual medicine. They have special training in sexuality. And Dr. Rubin treats people of all genders. In terms of shame, okay, sometimes we're middle-aged, let's say, or any age, but we're adults, and we need someone like Dr. Rubin, a doctor who can give us a proper diagnosis and who could help us to understand our bodies. When you go see Dr. Rubin, and she's in a practice called Into Medicine with some other fantastic doctors, but when you go to see Dr. Rubin, your visit is an hour and a half, maybe more. My visit, I think, was close to 2 hours. And during that time, through understanding your body, that shame can really start to dissipate. Because once we understand that it's not us as these broken individuals, but we might have something very specific that is going on. Now, in terms of children and messaging, there are some great resources that parents can use. If parents are interested in getting sex ed out to their kids, I'd like to refer them to a website called Amaze, 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 I believe it's .org. And Amaze puts out fantastic sex ed. So I think that it's us maybe as adults trying to find that sex ed, and it's also parents finding ways to pass on a healthy sexuality to their kids. And many parents can feel maybe uncomfortable doing that, but that's where they can look for, Amaze is a place where they can look to find resources that they can use.
I'm going to be using that one for my own children as we are just getting into these conversations. And I am feeling intensely the bravery that it takes as a parent to try to explain something that is nuanced and trying not to be prescriptive in, you know, in those conversations. And then also trying to fight against all of the terrible messaging that's out there, which is so hard to do right now because it's just loud, it's bombastic, it's crazy. So I'm so glad that you've got these resources on hand and that you're willing to share them with us. And thank you so much to Dr. Rubin too for this incredible work that she's doing.
Yeah, and I want to mention also, Dr. Rubin has put it in the chat, that often physicians will work in collaboration with other providers, like a mental health professional, like a pelvic floor physical therapist. So it could be a nutritionist, it could be a functional medicine doctor. So sometimes in order to really get to the bottom of what's going on, that it might take different people. And shame can be something that comes from a diagnosis, but it can also be something where we really do need to unpack things psychologically, and a good psychological intervention, a good therapist. I'm trying to say a good therapist. Good therapists can be really, really critical. And there's a new model. It's just really starting where the doctors and the shrinks, I shouldn't say shrink, therapists work in collaboration and often with other practitioners as well. So I definitely want to mention that. Thank you, Dr. Rubin.
So Laura, one question here is about, I think specifically your experience with Betty Dodson, and what is it like to go through a vulva sharing experience and exercise and group masturbatory therapy as someone who is a survivor of sexual trauma?
Yeah. You know what? It's a very interesting circle in Betty's living room, which is where this takes place. So Betty wants you to focus entirely on pleasure. And many, many people come there with a history of sexual trauma, not just their own, but sometimes their partners. And sometimes their partner's sexual trauma might have been something that impacted their relationship to the extent that things went awry in some way. So there's a lot of baggage around trauma. So she wants you to not really delve into that in that room, which is pretty fascinating because it's a place where you are going to touch upon your sexuality, but it's a place where you could really only be if you've worked through things sufficiently so that you would feel safe in that environment. So it's not for everyone, and it's not for everyone at every stage of their journey. She wants it to be a place where you have that ability to not be triggered. And that's not where everybody is on their journey. In terms of my own experience, I didn't feel triggered in that room. But I also felt that I wanted to view this experience or experience it a little bit more clinically than erotically. I saw it myself a little bit more distant from it in terms of like sensuality or arousal, much more about, well, what's going on. So part of that was the writer in me.
Mhm.
And part of that was probably also the survivor in me, that was a way to protect myself. And that was fine. I thought that was fine. But many, many, many people have this experience or go to her with a history of trauma.
What about just kind of your basic reservations around modesty and trust and openness? How does that fit in with the experience? How do you overcome those hurdles?
It just happens in the room. It was very weird. I mean, it was very, very weird. You come into her apartment and she says, "Get naked." She's kind of gruff. And she's got hooks in the hallway, and then it's like, "Ew." And then I walked into the living room and there were backjack chairs. This is a chapter in my book, chapter 16. There's backjack chairs and women are sitting there naked, already naked. They were just a handful when I walked in. So it's like, ew, what's going on, and like so much self-consciousness. What does my body look like? What did I wax? Did I not wax? Does it matter?
Somebody says, I hope she had the heat on nice and high.
It was warm. It was very, very warm. So it feels very, very weird, but then it's quickly normalized because you're just sitting there and you're talking about your sex life, which is already very revealing. And the fact now that you're hanging out, it's like irrelevant because you're talking about things you've never talked before. So yeah, you quickly just get used to it. And Betty's there. She was 86. Her 86-year-old beautiful body, and people there are all shapes and sizes, and so it's like, okay, ages and races. So yeah,
I actually had seen that episode of the Goop program before reading the book, so I had a pretty clear idea of what you had experienced, and I'd highly recommend it for anybody who has more questions to go watch that episode, because
or read chapter 16.
Well, first read chapter 16, and then if you need more, you can go watch that episode of the Goop show. But I mean, it's just really a beautiful vulnerability that I don't know, Laura, did you feel like it was a bonding experience with the other participants?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, there was no way not to feel a real sense of community with these people. Yeah, you shared so much. You were so vulnerable. Yeah.
One question here is refers back to some of what you talked about at the beginning around your anger. Your anger around kind of what you had been cheated of, helping to put you on this path. But the question is, did you also have a desire for pleasure? And I'm guessing that's to mean, like, was that also a driver behind this journey?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I thought there's got to be more to it than what I can experience. And I think this is, again, my upbringing with my mother. I feel that I want to really get the most out of life. And I felt that, okay, if there's more to sex and I'm not experiencing it, then I'm going to find out about that, because I'm not going to go to my grave not having known that. And this is supposed to be the ultimate experience. And so I wasn't going to allow myself to live my whole life without at least trying to find out if I too could have an ultimate experience.
One question just came in around how do couples work together to heal each other? It seems like this was both a very individual, personal experience for you, at the same time that it was also an experience that you were sharing with Kurt. So how do couples come together around this?
Definitely. I also want to mention, Sephora had put in here, Betty Dodson has an amazing workshop, and that's really important. I mean, a website. It's a fantastic resource, and it's listed in the back of my book too. It's dodsonandross.com. I think it's .com. Yes, communication, really. I say it's where the rubber meets the road, so to speak. I think oftentimes we might have a glimmer or we might know what's going to work for us, but bringing that into a partner exchange or into a relationship can be very, very difficult because there's so many patterns that have set in, perhaps maybe patterns of just going along with a partner's pleasure and never really even speaking about one's own pleasure. And that means not necessarily having ever really talked about one's own dissatisfaction. So that can be very difficult. So what I recommend, and I do these, they're not coaching sessions, but they're sexual healing information sessions. And I'm creating an online course. And what I recommend in terms of opening up that channel of dialogue is that the person who would like to move things in a different direction, that person finds some resource that they could just share with a partner. In fact, what I recommend that this person doesn't even ask the partner to, let's say, look at a video, but they first just make an appointment with the partner to talk about a video, that you really just chunk this down in terms of risk and in terms of maybe setting off some kind of defensiveness. But that you break this down and you really take these tiny little baby steps. But in terms of the actual conversation, rather than saying, hey, hon, I just want to talk about how sex has been lousy for me for the last 8 years, and I just forgot to mention it, that's probably not going to be a really good conversation. Instead, you could say something like, honey, I found this video that's interesting to me, and I'd love to show it to you. Can we make an appointment where I can show it to you? Is there a good time this weekend? And then when you get there, you show the video. And the video can be very innocuous. The video is actually, in a way, could be irrelevant. It's just that you want to open up a channel of conversation around your sex life. So it's a way to get into the conversation because you don't have to say anything. You're just going to say, here, watch this. And then you can say, what did you think? Yeah.
I don't want to neglect to mention that the book is full of these incredibly insightful prompts, journaling prompts, that I feel like, now that we're talking about how couples can pursue some of this together, I feel like that dialogue can also stem from some of those journaling prompts, which, I'd be so curious to know my partner's answer to some of those questions. Just what you've given us such a beautiful platform to open up the dialogue. We only have 2 minutes left, and I've been saving Susan's question because I'm so curious about this myself, but how has this journey to sexual healing impacted the other parts of your life and your psyche?
Oh, I love that question. It made me fearless. That isn't to say that I don't have fear. I have fear on a daily basis, but it gave me a sense of, I guess, being able to go out into the world and talk about anything and put my desires forth. So I'm going to call that fearlessness, but with a caveat that fear is still part of fearlessness. I think fearlessness is maybe the opposite of shame. It gave me an antidote. There goes that word again. It gave me an antidote to shame, which I'm calling fearlessness.
No, I love that. Well, Laura, I could talk to you forever. In fact, the last time we were in person, we did almost talk forever.
And we're going to get in person again.
I know. We're going to make that happen. Thank you to everyone for submitting these fantastic questions. This book is life-changing, and I want every single human to read it, man and woman.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Oh, are they going to ask us about what are we reading, or we're ending, Tom?
We have time to do that if you want to. What are you guys reading right now?
Ooh, all about women is like my May stacks are all about women. I'm reading the Book of Longings by Sue Monk Kidd. badass women asking for what they want in life.
Awesome. I'm reading a couple of things, if we have time. Well, there's Betty's book, which is Sex for One, that was originally published in the 70s. Look it up. You can get it at PNP. I'm rereading again Wild, which is just a book that I study and have read a million times. And Cheryl Strayed made this amazing video for me. So check out my Facebook page because she's an incredible human. So I'm rereading that again. I keep Love You Hard. This is Abby's book. I keep it. And
I love you.
I read it again and again as well. And if you're interested in writing memoir, just read amazing memoirs, the most courageous book on love. And then, sorry, the last one is a book that I just ordered from PMP, and I just got my email that said that it's on its way. So it's a book I'm going to be reading next, and that's Furious Gravity. And it's edited by Melissa Scholes-Young, who was very instrumental in helping me structure my book, and in so many ways. She's a fabulous developmental editor and just fabulous human. And it's women writers in DC, just my favorite collection of DC women writers. So I highly, highly recommend this book.
Well, thank you so much, guys, for those incredible picks and for the really awesome and moving conversation. Do any of you have anything else to say?
Congrats, Laura. This is an amazing accomplishment.
Okay, well, I just want to remind everyone to purchase the book from Politics and Prose, and we'll see you next time on PNP Live. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much for joining us. Thank you.